Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of a novel review. My name is Seamus and I'm the host, and this is a book podcast. If you have just wandered into my little realm of the podcasting world, of the YouTube world, if you have just wandered here, thank you so much for joining me. Basically, I do a different book every week, and it's a really fun episode today because I'm kicking off a new fantasy series. So every month I try read one book from a fantasy series, and it's been a while since I read a fantasy book because I didn't actually read the last book for the fantasy series. It was the Gormenghast trilogy, and I didn't read it for various reasons, and I actually talk about it in that episode, so if you're interested, go back and check out those episodes, of course. But today I'm kicking off Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun. It is 4 books, so I will be doing it over the next 4 months, April, May, June, and July, and it was recommended from a listener, so thank you so much for that. I hope we're all doing very well. The weather is turning slightly warmer in the Northern Hemisphere, which is absolutely lovely. The clocks have gone forward or back, whichever way they go, and I hope everyone has a cup of tea, coffee, maybe something a little stronger. I myself have a water here today, so make sure you drink your water because you're all probably dehydrated, as am I. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoy the episode. First though, just before I get into the episode, I'm going to pop the drink down for a second. I just went out book shopping the other week, and I want to take this moment just to say we should be shopping at independent bookshops. Let's keep the big guys on their toes, because we don't want independent bookshops to go out of business. So this is just your reminder to shop at independent bookshops. This is what I bought, and I thought I'd present it on this episode as this is a fantasy episode. Earthsea, the first 4 books by Ursula K. Le Guin. It's a book series that I've wanted to do for a while, but for a long time I always saw this book, this particular edition. I held it up for the benefit of those on YouTube. This edition with the green cover, and I always thought this was the first book, and so I naturally just thought I never sort of had time to do a book of this size. But then I was sort of perusing this bookshop, and I realized this is the first 4 books. Incredibly short, only 700 pages. So I kind of want to do this as well as a fantasy series, but then I was like, if I'm doing Book of the New Sun, April, May, June, July, this wouldn't get started till August, September, October, and November, which just seems too far away, especially when it's only 700 pages all up. So I'm going to try read this in between everything and then put together 4 episodes. So stay tuned for that. Let me know if you've read it, if you think it's any good, because I've heard pretty good things. So yeah, that's where I'm at with that, but that was just sort of what I bought the other day. Did a bit of book shopping, and let's remember to shop independent bookshops. If you would like to like and subscribe, I'd greatly appreciate that. If you're on YouTube, click the duck in the corner. If you're into books, make sure you like and subscribe. 5-star reviews also go a long way to help other people find the show. But as always, this is a free podcast, so just sit back and enjoy the show, and I hope you get something out of it. Cheers. Okay, on with the episode. Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun. As I said, it was recommended from a listener. I came into it, I'd never heard of Gene Wolfe, I'd never heard of The Book of the New Sun, and now it seems that I've heard of it. I can't escape it. It just seems to be everywhere. I tried to do a bit of research on it, but not too much that I spoiled any of the plot. Today's episode should be interesting, but I think it's also difficult to do an episode when you're technically, if it's 4 books long, I'm only really 25% into the story. So I think today I'm really going to be more speaking about what I think is happening and what I think is coming, and some of the thematic things as well that are sort of there for the taking. But I think in terms of general storyline and discussing whether I think it's a great series is a bit disingenuous to do on the first book when there's still plenty to go. But I had seen a lot about this. A lot of people, one of the comments I saw was, if you're interested in a book series that you're going to absolutely love but have no idea what's going on, check this out, which I thought was an interesting thing to say. Another one said it's got a great reread value, which I think always makes me a little bit wary, because a lot of people sometimes are like, oh, you didn't like that book, but it's so good when you reread it. And you're like, oh, I didn't like, it gets better with the second read. If, just give it a second chance. And it's like, oh, if I didn't like it the first time, like, does it deserve a second chance? So I'm always conscious when people say, oh, the reread is always better. It's like, yeah, but if I didn't enjoy it the first time, I'm probably not going to go back to it. And if you can't get a book the first time, then you're not naturally wanting to go back. But this book was really good, and I can definitely see, I'll get this out of the way early. I really enjoyed this book, and I can definitely see that I think a reread value would be much better because you've got the context of the whole story, and so there's little things you might understand with a bit more clarity. I should do an overview though, because I've just started rambling. Basically, it's about this relatively young guy called Severian, and he is in this world. It's a sort of science fantasy world. It's kind of a blend of science fiction and fantasy. And he's a torturer's apprentice, and torturers are kind of people that torture you when you've done stuff wrong, when you've broken the law. At least this is sort of my interpretation of them. And sometimes they're putting people to death. So it's that kind of society. And he's a torturer's apprentice, but he gets exiled after he shows mercy to one of the prisoners. And he gets exiled and sort of goes on this mini kind of quest journey, and that's sort of where we leave him. He's just leaving the main sort of city that he's been living in. So it sounds relatively simple, and I got to say this first book is relatively straightforward, and that's okay. I think it's scene setting, and I absolutely really enjoyed it. So where should I start? Let's start with I started watching the other day. I started watching the show Severance, which is incredibly popular at the moment because the second season has just aired. So I started watching the first season, and I kind of started watching that around the same time as I started reading this book. And the main character in this book is Severian. And Severian's this very interesting character, and that was one of the other things people said that commented about this book. They said that the main character Severian is a really complex character, and if you're a fan of series that sort of delve into characters in great depth, then this is a great series for you. And he is an incredibly complex character, and I think he's in a really interesting position as a torturer's apprentice, because they all wear masks. Their guild kind of wears masks, and straight away a mask is obviously masking your own face, but it's putting up this front of like uniformity. It is a uniform of sorts, and I think it's really interesting to be covering the face as well, because essentially if you're covering the face, you're covering the man behind the mask. And I started watching Severance because, if you don't know, Severance is a show about injecting this little chip into your brain, and basically it severs your body, or your mind I should say. Your body remains the same, but the idea is that you can go to work and the person, your innie it's called, while they're at work, they have no concept of the outside world and what you do outside of work. And then you leave the building, and people, or once you've left the building, you have no concept or conception about what you've just done at work. So essentially it's two different people occupying the same body. And I think it raises a lot of moral and ethical questions about the nature of work, and trying to separate the emotion from the work itself. And I think, obviously in this story, they're trying to dramatize it a lot and show the harms of this, but there is probably, a conversation around people that have to deal with these kind of really confronting things every day. That's not happening in the TV show, but I mean, people like paramedics that have to see really horrific scenes every day can be quite confronting. And I found it really interesting because obviously Severian is a torturer's apprentice, and he's got to put up this front of torturing people. And what does that mean for when he goes home? Like when he takes off his mask, what kind of a man is he? And then I was like, oh my God, the show is Severance and his name is Severian. Is there a link here? Have I just found some link? So I looked up the Latin meaning, and I was incorrect. Severian comes from the Latin word severus, which means severe or stern. And if you heard that word correctly, Severus, you would know that the Harry Potter character, the famed Harry Potter professor, Severus Snape, probably gets his name from that. And Severus Snape is an incredibly severe and stern character. So alas, I was wrong. Severian's name is not related to Severance, and is not about the duality of the man behind the mask. That's not to say that that's not going to go on in the series, and I do actually really hope that they delve into that a lot, because I think that's a really interesting route to go down. That it is the torturer going to be tortured, not necessarily in a physical sense, but an emotional sense, because I think it's an incredibly interesting sort of route to go down. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for in this book, is this kind of this story that follows this torturer's apprentice as he, comes to grips with the world in some capacity maybe. I don't know where it's going, but I'm okay with that because I thought it was a really cool story and a really well set story. Something else I should talk about is Severian. Another thing that I think alludes to this idea that he's going to be maybe tortured, or it's this kind of duality between the torturer and the man, is there's kind of three prominent women through this story. and Severian falls in love with all three of them incredibly quickly. And I found that really interesting because I think that's kind of, at least my read on it was that, he's a torturer's apprentice and he's got to torture people every day and kill people if necessary and inflict these incredibly harmful things. And obviously that would take an emotional toll, even though you can rationalize like this person committed a crime and that's why they're here now being tortured. And you can rationalize it like that. But of course, at the end of the day, you're still torturing another human being. And, that would play upon your mind in some capacity. And so the fact that he falls in love with these women really quickly, I think is telling me that, he is longing for, dropping my notes everywhere, he is longing for this human connection. He feels kind of, or at least when he's himself Severian, he is trying to abstract himself from the torturer, from this role, from this position that he has to play. And that's essentially why he gets excommunicated from the Torturers Guild, is because he did show mercy and he let his almost human side shine through. And yeah, I think obviously, falling in love with women, he wants to feel the love of women, the compassion of women, the warmth of women, these things that he isn't necessarily feeling in the Torturers Guild. So I found that really interesting, and I think, again, hopefully that's a plot point going forward, is, maybe he's going to be manipulated in some way. Someone's going to realize that he falls in love with people really easily, and they utilize that in some way to get something out of him. Something else. This will probably be the last thing I talk about. Actually, no, I'll briefly talk about the magic of this world, because it's this really curious, like I said, it's kind of science fiction fantasy, this science fantasy story. I've never read, I don't think, a science fantasy story. I love fantasy stories. I like science fiction, but sometimes I don't like them at all. So kind of getting this blend of both of them, the sort of fantasy sci-fi, the science fantasy, is really cool. And it's interesting because this ancient technology within the story seems to be confused with this magical realism that's going on. And it's kind of cool because it's this idea of like, how did it come about? How did this ancient technology come about? Well, it must be sort of magic. And I kind of love it because it's the same way, like with the pyramids today, they get, I believe we built them. I'm not a conspiracy theorist in that way, but it's kind of like, because we don't know how they did it, therefore we go to the extreme and think aliens or lost technology. And realistically, it is probably some form of lost technology. But it's like, kind of, when we say lost technology, we imagine them floating rocks into place or something like that, not just levers and pulleys. So I really like the idea of the magic in this book actually just being like a lost form of technology. I think that's really, really cool. The last thing I want to talk about is this feeling I got from the story. And it's a feeling I noticed so acutely because it has happened once in another story. It happened in the novella Ice by Anna Kavan. And it's this feeling, and that's the same thing. It's kind of like this sci-fi kind of story. And it's this feeling of absolute emptiness within the story. And I don't mean it in a very critical way, but it feels like there's long stretches in this book where they're walking, or they go to, how would I describe that? The conservatory kind of area where there's all the lakes. And it kind of feels like they meet these characters on the way, but they're the only characters on the road. The world just seems to be drained and empty of other people, even though they are there. And when I was reading this story, and it was the same with Ice by Anna Kavan, I got this intense feeling of loneliness within the story because it feels like the story is empty. And I hadn't really thought much of it. I thought it was just something I drew from Ice. But then I felt it this second time in this book, this intense feeling of emptiness, and I kind of looked into it, and I think I got to the bottom of what it is. It is a sort of a sub-genre of sci-fi, and it is this dying earth kind of feeling, this dying earth genre that appears to be a thing. And it's this kind of like, it's not dying earth like everyone's dying or there's been some nuclear holocaust or something like that, but it's this entropic exhaustion of earth. And it's kind of like everything around is just dying and decaying, and there's like complete emptiness. And naturally the world is still here, like the shape of the world is still here, but there's nothing occupying the space due to this entropic exhaustion of Earth itself. So I thought that like, it's such a curious feeling that I keep drawing from these stories, and I hope it's sort of prevalent through all the stories, because it's just so intensely weird to feel like this while reading a story, because I don't know how they're doing it, and I can't really detect it in the word, like any particular words or sentence structures that are setting off this feeling, but it just seems to be there. There's this ethereal feeling of loneliness that is prevalent throughout the text. So I really, really found it curious, but also enjoy it, but also don't love it, but sort of love it because I don't love it. And it's so, it's not prevalent in all literature, so it's incredibly rare to feel. So yeah, really enjoying it. The writing style I think is really cool. I quite like it. Again, everyone said you're probably not going to understand it. There's a few things that I think you learn along the way. Like at one stage, there's a fight scene and they're using leaves as their weapon of choice. And I think that's kind of the confusing aspects for me. It's like trying to wrap your head around what kind of a world you're actually in. Because I wouldn't say there's a huge amount of, I guess, scene setting in this. He doesn't have any big chapters where he sits down and kind of explains everything like they do. Probably my favorite is Lord of the Rings. Gandalf goes off and like researches the ring, and then he comes back to Frodo and is like, this is the one ring, and they sit down and have a cup of tea, and basically Gandalf spends the entire chapter dropping all this information about the world. And it's a really intelligent way to let Frodo know what's going on, but it lets the readers know what's going on, and it sort of builds the scene very nicely. There isn't too much of that in this book, which is not a bad thing at all. It's quite fun following this character of Severian and sort of discovering the world as he goes as well, because I get the sense he hasn't explored that much either. So it's really cool for that reason. So 25% in, absolutely loving it. Can't wait to get to book 2. I've got another book that I've just got to finish, the last sort of 30 pages, and then I'm jumping into book 2 because it's really fun, and I'm really excited to see where the story goes and follow these characters Severian on this journey. And hopefully some of the things I've spoken about come to fruition, but ultimately if they don't, that's life, and that's fine with me. So, I mean, what would I rate this? As an opening story, science fantasy, honestly, I'm going to give it a 4.2 out of 5. I thought it was really, really good. So that is Book of the New Sun. Sorry, I don't think I even ever specified the name of the first book. The Shadow of the Torturer. I've got it here in this lovely edition where it's the first 2 books in one edition and the next 2 books in the next edition. So this is Book of the New Sun, Shadow and Claw, and the first book is technically called The Shadow of the Torturer. So I'm giving that, The Shadow of the Torturer, a 4.2 out of 5. So what am I reading this week? This week I started reading, and I'm going to finish reading as well, the Victorian Chaise-Lounge by Marghanita Laski. It's a very short book, under 100 pages, and I just needed something to sort of tide me over. It's published by Persephone Books that publishes out-of-print women, and honestly, 68 pages in, I have no idea why this was out of print. It's a really cool story where this woman in, it was 1950s, lies down on this Victorian Chaise-Lounge, falls asleep, and then wakes up in, I think it was the 1830s. And at first you're kind of like, is this a sci-fi kind of story? Then you're kind of like, or the stage I'm at now is like, wait, is this just, is it a crazy person from 1830 that's dreamt up the 1950s? Is it someone from the 1950s hallucinating the 1830s? What's going on? What I'm hoping for, because it was an out-of-print book, I'm hoping the ending isn't going to be, and she woke up and it was all a dream, which, is a very annoying trope, but obviously wasn't a trope always, and would have probably been very exciting the first time we read it and understood it, and maybe even the second and third time as well, but obviously it got a bit tiresome. So that's kind of like literature 101, isn't it? They teach you that in primary school. Don't wake up with, and it was all a dream. So I have no idea where the story is going to go. I have no idea how it's going to end. I have no idea which direction the structure of the story is going to go. I don't know if it's sci-fi or kind of mystery, hallucinatory mystery, but very, very cool. So I'm going to finish that probably right now, to be fair. If you have made it this far, thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the show. If there's a book you want me to do, feel free to put it in the comments. But as always, just thank you so much for paying attention. So I think it's time to take us away. And today, the opening sort of words to the second book, The Claw of the Conciliator. But strength still goes out from your thorns, and from your abysses the sound of music. Your shadows lie on my heart like roses, and your nights are strong like wine.